Welcome to No Nonsense Nonprofits. Hi, I'm Sandy Ray, founder of Sandra E. Ray CPA, where we alleviate financial headaches so that you can create a bigger impact. Today, I want to talk to you about the funding freeze and planning ahead for that. We talked a couple of weeks ago about OMB's memorandum M2513, which was the funding freeze, which was eventually rescinded. So it did not take effect. But the executive order is still in place, even though the memorandum was not successful in doing what they had hoped to do, which was good for us. But I just wanted to talk to you about planning ahead because obviously there are some things that the federal government wants to do, and cutting federal funds to nonprofits is one of them. I think that we really need to be planning ahead for this possible contingency, and I want to talk to you about that. While you may think that you don't have federal funding, if you get funding from another nonprofit or from your state or local government, it's likely that the source of those funds come from the federal government. So you need to do some research and talk to those funders and find out what is the source of those funds and what's the likelihood that source of funding will slow down, be delayed, or even be taken away altogether. The first thing we need to do, it just said, is identify all of our funding sources. If there's any federal funding, is the first place, and it trickles down to us through other organizations, or we may have a grant with the federal government. For example, I have a client who has a grant with HUD. We need to look at those federal funding sources. So you may want to have a team of people working on this. Maybe one person picks one grant, one person picks another, and we do all this work together and keep together so we can identify those sources. If we determine that any or all of our grants have a federal funding source, one of the first things we want to do is maybe consult our legal advisor, have them review the grant agreement. Is there a termination clause? And how does that termination clause kick off? The other thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to look at how any funding freezes or loss of funding is going to affect our organization. Which programs do we have that are going to be affected? We've identified what grants, what restricted pots of money or unrestricted pots of money that are coming into our organization are sourced by federal funding. Then we can turn to our operations, our programs, and look at those and say, what happens if this money goes away? Not just looking at the programs in general, but specifically, how are our employees going to be affected, or independent contractors? Many of us have independent contractors that are doing the work of employees because we don't have employees doing that work. For example, accounting services. So we want to look at how any potential funding delay, which we have payroll that we have to make, could affect this, or a complete loss of that funding. How would it affect our programs, our employees, and our independent contractors? And how long are our current funding sources under an agreement, like a grant agreement, a contract? Do we have a contract for the next 5 years? Maybe our termination clause is fairly solid and we don't think that there's going to be any loss in funding after consulting our legal advisor. Or maybe we have a grant that's ending this year, and what's the likelihood that we will get a renewal on those funds? So we have to look at the funding periods. And this becomes very complicated because we're looking at the possibility of losing funding. We're looking at the possibility of not getting those funds renewed, and how that affects our programs, our constituents, our employees, and our volunteers and our team members. As we're considering this, we need to look at our cash reserves. Do we have enough cash reserves to get us through any time frame? Do we need to be building up those cash reserves? Do we need to reduce spending now so that we can build cash reserves? What are some other options for short-term funding? Can you go to the bank? Can you go to the Small Business Administration and get some short-term funding? So those are some things that we need to be looking at. And once we have all this information in place, I want you to develop an action plan, and maybe with a couple of contingencies even. Look at the contract terminations. Are we going to have to lay off employees or reassign employees to other areas? If we are going to have to lay off employees, what type of severance can we offer them? And then what is our implementation timeline from the time that we understand that we're going to be losing this funding? And you may have to do that for every grant that is federally sourced, depending on how it comes through to you. You may continue to receive it, you may not. So you're going to have to look at some contingencies there. While we still don't know what's happening with those federal funds, like I said, the executive order is still in place. I really encourage you to do this type of analysis so that when something does happen, you can act quickly because you already know the course of action that you want to take. And hopefully that quick action will lessen any impact of any potential funding loss that might occur. Sorry, I'm not very positive today, but I do hope this was helpful for you. If you haven't started looking at those grants and what is the ultimate source of the money that you're receiving and determining if it was federal grants and then making an action plan, please put that on your calendar, make some time to do that, whether you involve an entire team or you end up doing it just yourself. Make sure that you have that plan in place and you discuss it with your board. I'm hoping that this was helpful for you today. And if you have any questions on this or other topics you'd like us to cover, please put those in the comment section below. Of course, we always appreciate your likes, and I want to thank you for joining me today. Remember, creating a bigger impact starts with stopping the nonsense. If you're dealing with nonsense in your nonprofit organization, we'd love to help you cut through the noise.